One of the most enduring modern horror subgenres is zombies. Over the past nearly 9 decades, there has been an endless supply of movies, TV shows, novels, comic books, and see, there's a Funko Pop for every situation. Anyway, it's October, and I'm in a spooky mood, so I'd like to talk about the history of zombies in pop culture, and how they've thrived and survived. Meanwhile, I can't find a single good movie about gargoyles. Welcome to my meltdown. Zombie flicks are generally agreed to have begun coincidentally the same year as the topic of my last video, The Mummy. In 1932, United Artists released White Zombie, starring Bela Lugosi. The story takes place in Haiti, and the zombies are portrayed as raised from the dead by means of voodoo, and then mind-controlled. When their voodoo-practicing master is killed, they're released from control and no longer dead. This movie begat one sequel, Revolt of the Zombies, in 1936, though as with a lot of other quickie horror sequels of the era, none of the original actors returned, though they did reuse some shots of Bela Lugosi's iconic eyes for close-ups in mind control sequences for some reason. Several other zombie films were made by other companies, but in the same vein over the next few decades, including King of the Zombies, Plague of the Zombies, and I Walked with a Zombie. All of these continue with the general theme of voodoo-induced mind control, but very few really took off. The 1960s are when the more modern versions of zombies that most people know began, and strangely enough, it started with Mr. Rogers. Okay, not really, but kinda. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood sometimes featured film clips, showing how things are made, ranging from crayons to musical instruments, or demonstrating other topics in a way that wouldn't be scary to kids, ironically. A young director named George Romero worked on some of these, including a notable segment in which Mr. Rogers has a tonsillectomy. Essentially, the story goes that Romero was bored doing stuff like this, and short commercials, and wanted to make his own horror movie. He was inspired by previous 60s films such as Carnival of Souls and Vincent Price's The Last Man on Earth, at least visually. He liked the look of the creatures in these, and he liked the story The Last Man on Earth had been based on, Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, which was about vampires. But Romero wanted something new for us to chew on. Interestingly, while Romero's 1968 Night of the Living Dead is now widely regarded as the birth of the modern zombie genre, at the time he always referred to them as ghouls, and the word zombie isn't uttered during the events of the film. As well, unlike the previous 3.5 decades of zombie movies, there's never truly a reason given for why the dead are rising or why they think we are so delicious. But the fact remains that Night of the Living Dead was the nexus of the basic components of what we now think of when we say zombie, especially in relation to the eating of flesh and the ability to kill them only with a headshot or decapitation. This established Romero's career, leading to 5 other installments in this series, as well as a ton of other horror movies, and inspiring other filmmakers, including the likes of John Carpenter and later Edgar Wright. You can't really call the rest of the Dead movies sequels because there are no real continuing characters or plot threads for the most part. Just a series of films in the same world depicting different locations and situations as the world deteriorates. These include Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. A fair number of horror fans hold up Dawn as the best of the series, though I personally have a special place in my heart for Day of the Dead, which for 1985 has some truly interesting practical effects. People look at me weird when I say Day of the Dead was a movie that changed my life, but it was. After Dawn of the Dead was a success, studios started taking more notice of the genre and churned out a lot of movies, which has continued ever since. They're very cheap to make in a lot of cases, so why not? There are so many of these that it would be hard to go through them all. There's literally hundreds. I couldn't. But one of the more noteworthy was Italian director Lucio Fulci's Zombie 2, which was conceived as an unofficial sequel to Dawn of the Dead, but inserts back in the old school plot point of the zombies being created via voodoo. It's also notable for a sequence where a zombie has an underwater fight with a shark, and an end scene in which zombies arrive in New York en masse, having walked there at the bottom of the ocean from an island in the Caribbean. Around the same time Day of the Dead was released, Night co-writer John Russo put out Return of the Living Dead, which was also an unofficial sequel to the Romero films. But this time it led to a lawsuit between Romero and Russo over the rights to the Of the Dead titling and some advertising issues. Return of the Living Dead was the first movie to characterize zombies as wanting to eat brains specifically. It also seems to be the starting point of the trend of running or fast zombies. Which works for this movie, as it is generally a comedic take, and it is pretty funny, but in general, as a trend, I loathe it. Fast zombies to me represent a lowest common denominator angle that doesn't understand how something that is slow can be scary. Fast zombies are scary because one of them can run up and bite you. Slow zombies are terrifying because your speed won't save you. One of the things that gets people killed in zombie movies overwhelmingly is overconfidence. You can get away short term, but eventually you need to rest, sleep, recover from the horrors you've seen, and the undead don't. They won't stop. They can lose their legs and they won't stop coming. They will keep crawling after you if they have to. They won't need a nap, and every hour there are more of them than there are of you. There's never a point where you can reclaim one of them to your side, but every time one of you dies, unless it's by a headshot, they have one more added to their army. You will run out of bullets. You will be overwhelmed. The end. In some cases, Romero-style zombies are even shown to have access to basic memories of their past and have the ability to use basic tools, bludgeoning and stabbing weapons, and even, in one notable instance, firearms. Additionally, fast-running zombies don't make a lot of logical sense as a creature that is actively decomposing. I know logic doesn't much apply when we're dealing with a dead body resurrected either by a virus or some sort of supernatural means, but it just makes more sense for them to be slower, especially ones that have been dead for a bit. A dead body is going to have atrophied muscles at the least. They're not going to be outrunning marathons. But either way, there's a level of existential dread to a foe who you know is slower than you, less intelligent than you, can't walk up a stairway, but is probably eventually going to win anyway. Running zombies simply don't represent the same level of horror for me. They're just, okay, so a zombie movie, but everything's just jump scares. That's boring, uncreative, and in general is lazy filmmaking. And I know George Romero agreed with me on this, and I can't think of a more authoritative figure on the topic than that. Return of the Living Dead had 4 sequels labeled Part 2, 3, Necropolis, and Rave to the Grave, those last 2 being direct-to-video. 3 is notable for a main plot involving a woman who slowly is getting turned after being bitten and is able to stave off fully losing her humanity by way of a series of piercing and body modifications. I don't know, the 90s were weird. In 1990, the first of many remakes of Night of the Living Dead were made. This one was directed by Tom Savini, who is mostly known for his special effects work, especially in a lot of previous Romero films, zombie-related and otherwise, as well as the early installments of the Friday the 13th franchise. His remake of Night is actually regarded as a pretty solid film in most respects, and features a very different and less bleak ending. It also upgrades the Barbara character to actively participating in the action and being kind of the badass of the movie, which is an improvement. As much as I love the original, I do like that where her character goes in the remake a lot more. That the script was rewritten by Romero himself to update his own story probably has a lot to do with why it feels like a respectful update. Due to unfortunate copywriting loopholes that have kept Night of the Living Dead in the public domain since its release, there have been other unofficial and unaffiliated with Romero remakes in 2006, 2009, 2011, 2012, 2017, and more coming. Dawn of the Dead was remade in 2004 by a then much less well-known Zack Snyder, and written by an even then less well-known James Gunn, both of whom have gone on to a lot bigger things. The Dawn remake has fast zombies, but I like a lot of the nods it makes to the original, and honestly I think it's one of Snyder's better films. It also somewhat nods back to Zombie 2 in its ending, where the survivors escape and end up on a remote island only to find that the undead have overridden that too. Video games such as Resident Evil have spawned their own film series, and there are movies such as 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later, etc. that have boosted more of the fast zombie genre in the past few decades. There have been a number of novels about zombies, one of my favorites being World War Z by Max Brooks. Do not mention the movie version to me, it's dead to me. But the book, it's like if the History Channel did a documentary series, but about the zombie apocalypse and how we barely survived it. And it's just a really good read. Day of the Dead was remade twice, in 2008 and 2018, under the title Day of the Dead Bloodline. I have not seen these, but I don't know anyone who has seen them who has enjoyed the experience. I watched the trailers for them and I wish I hadn't. In 2013, an opera was composed based on the original Night of the Living Dead and performed in Pittsburgh, which is probably one of the weirder branches of this entire tree. One of the best latter entries in all of this has been 2004's Shaun of the Dead, which was directed by Edgar Wright, who of course had been inspired by Romero to start making movies in the first place. It takes a lot of very loving pokes at the entire genre and at Romero's films in particular, and as a side note has the best use of Queen's Don't Stop Me Now in film that I've ever seen. The most recent revivals of the genre have been TV series like The Walking Dead, based on the 2003 comic book series. The Walking Dead is very much a spiritual successor to the Romero films, focusing a lot on how society develops and how it breaks down in the wake of such an extreme crisis. Greg Nicotero serves as a producer on the show and heads up the effects department, as well as having directed over 30 episodes of the show, which is a nice full circle since his first job doing effects makeup was on Romero's 85 Day of the Dead, under the supervision of the aforementioned Tom Savini. It really is interesting to note that while the list of zombie or zombie-related movies is nearly endless, so much of it thematically still goes back to the Romero films, almost completely ignores the voodoo origins that came before, and so little of what has come since significantly added to the lore in a lasting way. In July of 2018, George Romero passed away in his sleep from complications due to lung cancer at age 77. I met him twice at horror conventions in the mid-2000s, and he was such an incredibly warm, nice guy, extremely tall, had the thickest glasses you've ever seen. He was in his mid-60s by that point, and it was like talking to your grandfather, but he wanted to talk about corpses who eat the flesh of the living, and why they were so much scarier when they're slow. I have an autographed picture of him on my wall, surrounded by actors in zombie makeup reaching out for him during filming of Dawn of the Dead. It's personalized to me and then says, "Stay scared, George Romero." And somehow that seems like the perfect way to remember the man who created the modern zombie. If you have a topic you'd like me to discuss or a film series you'd like me to dive into, let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more of this. Thanks for coming to my Meltdown.